Hey, Hugh here, and today I'm going to show you how to make some really tasty milk drinks using the Sanremo YOU. Now, my first consideration when I'm making a milk coffee is what is the roast style of the coffee that I'm using. So here I have two different roast profiles, and I'm going to make some adjustments on this machine to suit that style of coffee. So here I have a slightly darker roast profile comparing with this one. They're going to need a different extraction approach. So the darker roast is going to have a little bit more roast character that we want to avoid. So we don't want to push the extraction really hard, or else we'll start to taste some of those roast qualities. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into the machine. I'm going to bring the temperature down to 92 degrees. Now, if I have that higher temperature, I'm going to extract some of that roast quality and some of the bitterness that we're getting inside these beans. They're a little bit more readily available here. When I use the lighter roast profile, I'm going to increase the temperature because this means I can push the coffee harder without risking pulling some of that roast character out of the beans. So now I have the slightly darker roast profile. This is going to be a little bit more textural style of milk based, and I want to keep that really smooth on the palate. So by dropping that temperature, it'll come across a little sweeter. You're going to cut some of that dryness and bitterness, and everything will be a little bit smoother on the palate. But also the other change I'm going to do is with the paddle. I'm going to bring that pressure down slightly from 9 bars to 8.5 bars. That small change will make quite a big difference to the smoothness on the palate. So I'll show you how I do that with the paddle. So for these extractions, I'm not going to go above 9 bars today. So I'm going to go into the paddle settings. I'm going to set 9 bars as a maximum. This is going to make it easier to run each extraction. So we go into the menu at the top, you scroll down, you'll see paddle settings, and then you can change the bar pressure, if it's not already, onto 9 bars. That means when we increase the paddle to the end, it's not going to go above 9 bars. So this is going to help us get the fastest fill rate at the beginning of the extraction, and then also hit the bar pressures that we need quite easily from there. So now that we've set that, we have 92 degrees. I'm going to plug in my first extraction. All right, so for this particular coffee, it's a little bit more roasted. I want to expose some of that quality of roast less, so I'm going to increase my dose. The more coffee in the basket, the lower the efficiency of extraction. So we're not going to push this coffee deeper into the extraction where we're going to get some of that bitterness and that roast. So I've put 22 grams and I'm going to dose that into the handle. Okay, here I have 22 grams in the basket. And now what I'm going to do is get all my cups set up, and I'm going to aim for that 8.5 bar extraction. So I want a fast fill rate at the beginning, so I'm going to get the paddle and go fully on to go the fastest fill rate possible, getting that coffee saturated quickly. And then from there, I'm at 9 bars. I can just fine tune it back just a small amount to hit that 8.5 bars that I'm aiming for. So plugging in, fully on, we're at that 9 bar, and then we're going to fine tune back to 8.5. Now with this extraction, I don't want to stretch out the shot too much to expose some of that roast quality. And also with a more roasted coffee, you've broken down more acid. So a stretched shot isn't going to find a very balanced result. So for this one, I'm going shorter than 1:2 ratio. I'm going to pull 36 grams in the cups. So at 33, I flick off, and I'll get my 36. So now I'm going to set these shots aside. I'm going to do my extraction with a lighter roast. So straight away, temperature is going to come up to 93.5. I'm going to dose out my coffee at a slightly lower dose with a lighter roast. Remembering the less coffee in the basket, the higher efficiency of extraction. So by bringing that dose down, we're pushing extraction efficiency a little more because we're not at risk of extracting that roast quality as much. So for this one, I'm going 21 grams in the basket. So now we've set the paddle to 9 bar as its maximum. So it's a lot easier to just push to the maximum, and it'll get that fast fill rate and level out at 9 bars. Now this roast profile, it's a little bit lighter. It has a little bit more acidity than the other coffee. So I can stretch out that profile just a little bit more to open up the flavor of that particular origin, variety, and process. So I'm going a little bit closer to 1:2 ratio for this. So that 21 grams in, 40 grams out, it's pretty close to 1:2. And this will find a better balance for this particular roast profile. Okay, so now that we have our extractions, we want to bring milk into the picture. Now milk's job is bringing sweetness and creaminess to balance out the coffee. So there's a few things that we would normally do as baristas to keep that sweetness inherent in the milk. First is not steaming that milk too hot. Not going much hotter than 60 degrees, especially not up to that 72.6 where we really start to break down sweetness. We want to be steaming that milk to the right temperature to maximize that quality. But then on the machine, depending on the setting that you're using the machine in, how much time you have, you can adjust a few settings here to increase that sweetness a little bit as well. So usually the machine comes at 1.9 bar pressure out of the factory to give us that really nice balance between speed and quality of milk. Now, if you're at home and time is not as important to you, you can drop the bar pressure to be a little bit more gentle on the milk. And this will give you that little bit more sweetness in the milk that we're going to add. So I'm going to go into settings, service parameters, and we have here steam boiler pressure. So I'm going to drop that bar pressure from 1.9 down to 1.2. Now this is going to steam that milk slightly slower, but you're going to get a slightly sweeter result, meaning we're going to balance out our coffee a little bit easier. So because we brought that bar pressure down, I'm only going to use a small size jug. I've got 200 grams of milk in here. I'm not going too much more or else you'll struggle to get it spinning. All right, so now that I've got my milk all steamed beautifully, it's gonna be super sweet. I'm gonna prepare each coffee 2 different ways. Now, if your coffee is a little bit fresh off roast, which this roast profile here is, it's gonna react differently with my pouring style. So the first cup, I'm gonna do what I call a pre-swirl. So when you have a little bit of gas left in the coffee from the degassing, if it's a little bit fresher than ideal, which with the darker roast, we want to run slightly fresh or else we expose the roast profile. Well, we're going to want to soften that slight harshness we'll get on the surface of the crema. So I'm going to swirl a very small amount of milk, keep it small, swirl that in first, and that's going to bind some of those harsher gases to the fats in the milk. And then I'm going to continue my pour as normal. So the reason I'm doing this side by side is because we're getting pretty close to an ideal age. It might be still a little bit fresh, but when we get to the correct age of the coffee, it will often switch from the pre-swirled version to the non-pre-swirled version will become better. So that first one, I've done the pre-swirl, and the second one, I'm going to pour just normally. Now it's a very small detail. Doesn't seem like it's going to make a big difference, but that pre-swirl in there is really going to soften some of that CO2, some of those harsher gases on the crema, and allow us to taste the flavor profile of the coffee underneath a little bit easier. But once we get to a coffee that is at its peak age, it doesn't have that gassiness left, you'll often find that the pre-swirled version will taste a little bit flat, a little bit milky. And when we don't pre-swirl, you get more concentration and intensity of flavor from the crema on top. So try this side by side with your coffee at the age that it's at, and you'll find that extra little lever that you can pull to find really nice, balanced, smooth milk coffee. So finally, you'll notice that I am weighing my milk weight. Cup's gone on to the scales with the espresso. I've teared it off. I'll pour my milk coffee, and then I'll weigh how much milk that I've added to the espresso. I'm going for around 110 to 120 grams of milk weight for that single shot of espresso. So if we're inconsistent here, we'll have different amounts of fat and sugar and different balancing properties. So a recipe may not be ideal for more milk or less milk. We're changing the goalpost every time we change our milk weight. So we want to keep that as a constant so we can change our recipe and get the result that we want very predictably. So with these few tips, a few changes in settings on the Sanremo YOU, you can get beautiful milk bastes to suit the roast profile that you're looking at. Thanks for watching. Cool.